The winter of 1940 settled upon Germany like a heavy shroud. Snow muffled the cities, and even the roar of factories seemed to fade beneath it. Yet in the heart of the Black Forest, far from the eyes of the common people, the night was not silent. Beneath towering pines, blackened by soot and frost, floodlights cut through the blizzard, revealing a secret world of movement. Prisoners in striped uniforms dragging steel rails across frozen mud, guards shouting in harsh German tones, sparks hissing from welding torches. It was said that Germany was building victory, but what rose here was not for victory. It was for control, for the will of one man who believed destiny itself could be engineered. The project was known officially as Führersonderzug, the Führer's special train, a mobile command base for Adolf Hitler. But behind that official name, beneath sealed orders and dead witnesses, it had another title, whispered in the corridors of the SS, America. The name carried irony. To Hitler, America symbolized both the dream and the disease. A land of endless industry, boundless ambition, and uncorrupted energy. "They have harnessed their continent," he once said to Albert Speer, "and so must we harness ours. Germany must move as one machine, one mind." And so it began, the dream of a moving fortress, a rolling city of command and death, capable of crossing continents unseen. But America was no mere fortress. It was a vessel built for something else entirely. The construction site, buried under the thick forest canopy near Triberg, was guarded by a detachment of SS men hand-picked by Heinrich Himmler himself. Even Wehrmacht officers were denied entry without written clearance from the Reich Main Security Office. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts, laying hidden rails that wound like a snake through the woods, connecting to an isolated tunnel network carved into the mountains. The air smelled of diesel, blood, and burnt oil. Men who faltered were shot and buried in shallow graves beneath the trackbed. Their bones became part of the foundation. At night, the forest echoed with strange sounds, grinding metal, the thump of engines, the cry of steam under pressure. Villagers in nearby towns were told the work was for an armored supply line. Those who asked too many questions were relocated east. By the spring of 1941, the shape of the machine emerged from shadow, a convoy of 25 cars, longer than any known train in Europe, clad in plates of hardened steel. The engineers called it a Schienenfestung, a fortress on rails. The first few cars were practical, a locomotive built by Krupp, armored personnel cars, communication cabins, kitchens, quarters for SS guards. But farther down the line, things grew stranger. Cars without windows. Cars with reinforced floors and ceilings. One with a double hull, like a submarine. Another equipped with massive generators and cooling pipes, the kind used in experimental energy systems. Some were filled with crates marked with only a single symbol, the black sun of the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi occult research branch. The engineers were told not to ask questions. They didn't. But whispers spread among them that these sealed cars were to hold relics of power looted from occupied lands, that one car was a mobile laboratory, that the train itself would be capable not only of carrying Hitler across Europe, but of bending reality around him, a moving sanctuary immune to fate. In June of that year, an SS officer named Otto Wahlen wrote in his private journal, a record never meant to be read. "The Führer's train is unlike any machine conceived by man. It is not built for travel, but transformation. They speak of it as a vessel, a womb of the new world. The scientists call it America. I no longer believe it is named for a place." That was the month Dr. Emil Weiss arrived. Weiss was not a Nazi by conviction. Born in Prague, a theoretical physicist of Jewish descent, he had lectured on wave resonance and quantum symmetry before the war. His research, radical even by modern standards, explored how sound and energy could alter the structure of matter. To the Reich, such ideas were gold. In 1939, his institute was shut down by the Gestapo. His colleagues disappeared. Weiss himself was offered a choice: serve the Reich or vanish with them. He agreed to save his wife and daughter. They were taken to a camp anyway. He was told they'd be well kept as long as he remained cooperative. When Weiss first set eyes on America, it was already alive. Its boilers hissing, its hull gleaming like a serpent's skin under the work lamps. He was escorted through the interior by Himmler himself, who spoke of destiny as if it were an equation. "We are standing at the edge of the ancient world, Herr Doktor," Himmler said, his pale eyes unblinking. "The ancients knew things we have forgotten. You will help us remember." Weiss was assigned to the central compartment, car number 13, an unlucky number for most, but in the Reich's numerology, a sacred one. The car was unlike anything he had seen. Walls lined with copper tubing, floors reinforced with tungsten, machinery that thrummed faintly as though it were breathing. His orders were to investigate the vibrational nature of the soul. That was how they phrased it, a grotesque blend of science and mysticism. They spoke of merging the scientific method with the occult teachings of the Thule Society, of combining ancient rituals with modern physics. Weiss thought it madness, but the SS provided him with everything he demanded: laboratory tools, assistance, even captured texts from across Europe. Among them were tablets stolen from Iraq, inscribed with cuneiform symbols referring to the song that awakens stone. There were Norse runestones, Egyptian stelae depicting gods with tuning forks instead of scepters, and fragments of Gregorian chants rewritten in numeric sequence. Himmler believed they were keys, frequencies that could open the hidden dimensions of existence. Weiss tried to rationalize it all through science, but as weeks passed, he began to feel something in the air, a subtle vibration, like the faint hum of electricity when the machine was idle. At night, he heard whispers in the steel walls, the rhythmic pulse of distant engines when the train stood still. Sometimes the instruments activated on their own. The gauges twitched. The compasses spun. One night, a Tesla coil in the generator car began to discharge, though no power was running. Weiss shut it down personally, only to find frost forming on the metal despite the heat. By the summer of 1942, America began its first covert journey, not on public tracks, but through hidden rail lines that stretched from Stuttgart to the Baltic coast, passing through underground junctions and sealed tunnels built in secret. No civilian ever saw it. To the outside world, it did not exist. The few Wehrmacht officers assigned to guard the convoy described it as unnerving. "When the Führer travels," one wrote in a letter to his wife, "we hear the train before we see it. The air grows heavy, the snow glows faintly, and the forest goes quiet. Even the wolves do not howl." Weiss recorded his impressions privately, writing on scraps of paper he hid behind ventilation panels. "This machine is alive. It responds to us. Sometimes the readings spike when no experiment is running. Once, I swear I heard a human voice calling through the frequency monitors. It spoke in a tongue I cannot recognize, but I understood the meaning. Keep the door closed." Himmler, meanwhile, was delighted. He presented America to Hitler not as a simple train, but as a symbol, the manifestation of the Reich's destiny, its will to conquer not just land, but truth itself. When Hitler toured it for the first time, he was fascinated. He ran his hands along the steel walls and said softly, "With this, I can ride above the end of the world." Orders were issued to make the train fully operational by the end of 1943. Weiss begged for more time, citing instability in the resonance chambers. Himmler refused. "We are not bound by your mortal fears, Doctor," he said. "This is not science, it is revelation." And so, under the cover of endless winter, the train that should never have existed began to move again, a steel leviathan snaking through the forests of Europe, its engines singing low, its purpose known only to a handful of men. Those who saw it from afar would later describe it as something unearthly, a moving shadow that made no sound, but left the air trembling in its wake. The peasants called it the ghost train, though in time another name would spread through the whispers of soldiers and spies alike: Der Zug des Teufels, the devil's train. They were wrong. It was not the devil's. It was man's. And it had already begun to awaken. Snow fell quietly over the Silesian forests as the train slept beneath the mountain. The old miners who had been forced to carve the tunnels swore that even years after the war's end, they could still hear metal echoing under the ice, the pulse of a machine that refused to die. In the archives of the British War Office, there exists a folder that never made it to public record, stamped Verboten, Operation Eisenherz. It contained reports, photographs blurred by time, and the testimony of one man, Sergeant Alan Reeve of the 8th Reconnaissance Corps. His unit had been tasked with securing a series of German supply lines in the winter of 1945. What they found was not a supply line, but something far older and infinitely darker. The train itself was buried deep within a disused railway spur leading into the Owl Mountains. 12 cars, armored and sealed, their insignia burned away by deliberate fire. When the British engineers cut open the first car, they found what looked like hospital beds, or perhaps operating tables. Each one had leather restraints, a copper wiring system, and beneath the floor, something that pulsed faintly, like a dying heart. Among the artifacts recovered was a journal. The cover bore only the initials HW, later traced to Dr. Heinrich Weiss, a physicist and surgeon who had vanished in the last months of the Reich. His writings were not the ramblings of a zealot, but of a man possessed by a terrifying vision: to unchain the human body from its limits, to make flesh obey will as steel obeys heat. Reeve's report described the second car in detail: rows of human silhouettes preserved in tanks, suspended in viscous amber fluid. Their faces were calm, almost peaceful, but each bore incisions along the spine, metal threads vanishing beneath their skin. The smell of antiseptic mixed with burnt ozone. One soldier vomited inside his mask, another refused to re-enter the car. The last pages of Weiss's journal spoke of something called Project Morgenlied, Morning Song. It was meant to create soldiers who did not sleep, who felt no pain, whose bodies could repair themselves faster than any wound could kill them. The notes described the fusion of biological tissue with electromagnetic resonance, the same frequency used by the train's generator system. Weiss wrote, "We have found a way to make the nervous system hear the song of the current. The body listens, obeys. Soon the train itself will be alive." When Reeve's men reached the locomotive, they discovered why the locals had called it the Dämonenzug, the demon train. The entire cab was lined with Tesla coils, humming faintly even without power. A body was still strapped into the engineer's chair, shriveled, skin fused with copper filaments. A British electrician who examined it said it looked as though lightning had tried to escape from the man's bones. Yet, despite the lack of external power, the dials still flickered. The engine breathed. Reeve ordered the area sealed. They set demolition charges and prepared to bury the tunnel. But that night, the snowstorm came, a white wall of silence that cut all communication. Through the static of their radios came something else, a rhythmic sound. 3 long beats, a pause, then 3 more. Morse code, but too slow, too deliberate. The operator swore it came from inside the mountain. They followed the sound, deeper into the darkness, through corridors lined with frost. And there, at the heart of the train, they found the control car. Walls covered in equations, human diagrams, a map of Europe drawn in concentric rings. In the center of the room, a large iron coffin hummed faintly, wires coiling from its sides into the walls. The label on the metal plate read, Subject A01, Status Active. Reeves' notes end abruptly after that line. The final page of his journal, smeared with oil and blood, contains only 3 words. It looked human. Years later, when post-war recovery crews returned to the Owl Mountains, they found the tunnel sealed not by explosives, but by solidified iron, as though the stone itself had melted and cooled in an instant. Radiation levels were higher than normal. The geologists shrugged it off. The soldiers who had been there never spoke again. In 1962, a Polish railway worker unearthed a rusted rail line leading nowhere. He followed it through the trees, down into the valley where the snow never melted. At the end of the line stood a single black door, half buried in ice. Behind it, silence, and the faint sound of metal breathing. When asked about the incident by local historians decades later, he would only whisper, "The train was still warm." The storm arrived like the sky itself had decided to bury the war. Snow turned to knives in the wind, slicing through the darkness as the men of the 8th Recon huddled around their sputtering lamps. Somewhere beyond the blizzard, the mountain groaned, an ancient sound, low and hollow, that seemed to breathe in time with the train beneath it. Sergeant Alan Reeve paced through the tunnel mouth, his boots crunching over shards of ice. The radio hissed uselessly in his hand. Every channel was static. Private McKay tried to joke about it, said maybe Berlin was done talking, but the sound that answered him wasn't laughter. It was the faint, rhythmic thrum from deep inside the mountain, like a pulse muffled under tons of rock. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. Morse code. Reeves' stomach turned cold. They had already set the charges. By dawn, they were supposed to collapse the tunnel, bury the train, and forget what they'd seen inside those iron cars. But now the pulse was growing louder, syncing with the trembling of the ground. The storm outside made retreat impossible. The only path open was the one that led down, back to the train. The men lit their torches and descended. The first car was as they had left it. Rows of glass cylinders filled with amber fluid, bodies suspended like ghosts in honey. But the liquid inside now glowed faintly, pulsing with that same rhythm. When the light passed through the glass, the faces inside twitched, not from decay, but from something that resembled dreaming. Reeve forced himself forward, muttering to no one, "They're dead. They've got to be dead." Private Langley reached for the control panel at the end of the car, hoping to cut the generator lines. The moment his gloved fingers brushed the switch, every light in the train snapped to life. A deep hum rolled through the metal like a heartbeat. Red emergency bulbs flared across the ceiling, bathing the corridor in blood-colored light. "The red light," McKay whispered. "It's back on." The air turned heavy with static. Hair stood on the men's necks. One of the glass tanks cracked, a thin line at first, then a spiderweb fracture. Fluid hissed out, steam rising as it touched the frozen air. Inside, the silhouette moved. A hand pressed against the glass. The flesh was pale, threaded with copper wires that glimmered like veins of fire. Langley fired his weapon, the shot deafening in the metal chamber. The glass exploded, amber fluid splashing across the walls. The thing inside tumbled out, a man, or what had once been a man. His eyes were white, mouth working soundlessly. He crawled forward, dragging wires from his spine like roots torn from the soil. Then, mercifully, he stopped moving. Reeve didn't order anyone to check for a pulse. He just said, "Move." They pushed through to the next car. Inside were the remains of instruments, coils, copper cages. In the center stood the iron coffin they had seen before, its lid trembling slightly as the hum grew stronger. The surface was slick with frost, yet heat radiated from it. On the control desk nearby, the dials flickered between languages: Deutsch, English, Latin. One word kept repeating on the monitor: Erwachen, awakening. "Who's doing this?" Reeve barked. No one answered. The red light intensified until shadows vanished. The hum rose to a shriek. Then came a voice, not from any mouth, but from the metal itself. It was faint, mechanical, distorted by decades of corrosion, yet unmistakably human. Sequence complete. Subject A01 active. The coffin lid burst open. Heat and pressure slammed through the car. The lamps exploded. Men screamed. Reeve hit the ground, ears ringing, vision full of red mist. Through it he saw a figure standing amid the wreckage, tall, wrapped in cables that moved like serpents. Its face was covered by a breathing mask of bronze, its eyes glowing the same red as the lights. Steam curled off its skin. When it turned toward them, every weapon froze mid-air. The air itself seemed to thicken, obeying its will. Reeve forced his hand to his sidearm. He fired once. The bullet flattened against the figure's chest and fell to the floor, glowing orange. Then it spoke again, clearer this time, voice like grinding steel. "The war is not over." The generator behind it roared to life. Sparks showered the corridor. The entire train began to move, wheels grinding against frozen rails buried for months. The sound echoed like thunder through the mountain. Snow cascaded from the ceiling as the ground shifted. Somehow, impossibly, the train was powering itself. Reeve shouted for his men to retreat. They scrambled toward the exit, slipping on the icy metal. McKay was the last to look back. He swore he saw the figure step into the engineer's cab and place a hand on the throttle. Red light poured from every window as the locomotive screamed forward into the darkness of the sealed tunnel. Then, silence. When the survivors stumbled into the storm outside, the entire side of the mountain erupted. A plume of fire and molten rock split the night sky, lighting the snow blood red. For a moment, it looked as if the mountain itself had opened an eye. Then, everything went still again. By dawn, the blizzard had buried the entrance completely. The charges were never detonated. No one ever found Reeve's men, except for Reeve himself. Discovered days later, wandering alone through the forest, face frostbitten, eyes burned as if by light from within. He spoke only once before dying of exposure in a field hospital near Wrocław. His final words, recorded by the medic, were almost a whisper. It drove itself away, toward the east, toward the dawn. By 1962, the Owl Mountains were shrouded in winter fog and silence, but the whispers never stopped. Local villagers spoke of lights moving beneath the snow, of metallic hums that rose from the frozen earth. The stories reached the ears of both Eastern Bloc and Western intelligence, filtered through channels, rewritten, often dismissed as superstition. Yet a small number of intercepted radio signals proved otherwise. A CIA analyst in Frankfurt, Agent Michael Carver, was the first to notice the anomaly. He called it the silent line, a repeating series of pulses appearing sporadically on long-wave frequencies, detectable only at night. The pattern was not random. 3 short bursts, a pause, then 3 long bursts, echoing the same rhythm recorded in Reeves' journal decades before. When he cross-referenced it with Soviet monitoring reports, the similarity was undeniable. Both sides recorded the same phenomena, yet no train existed on any map. Meanwhile, in the forests near the former Silesian border, a covert Soviet team led by Major Sergei Volkov was dispatched to investigate. Their objective was simple: locate, document, and recover any surviving German experimental technology. No one mentioned the train itself. Officially, it was a lost armored research convoy. But those on the team knew better. Those who had survived the wartime stories called it Железная Dusha, iron soul. Volkov's team found the first trace in the middle of a frozen valley, crushed trees laid aside as though something immense had passed through, rail lines bent and polished from unseen friction. The snow surrounding the track glowed faintly red at night. One soldier, Pavel, claimed he saw a shadow moving ahead of them, tall, humanoid, yet impossibly elongated, as if the train itself had stepped from one world into another. The team followed the tracks deeper into the mountains. Days passed without sun. The air seemed to thrum with vibration, low and almost musical. Even the radios could not maintain signal. Static was punctuated with the same coded pattern Carver had analyzed in Frankfurt. For hours, the pulse seemed to synchronize with the men's heartbeats, forcing one or two to collapse, writhing, mumbling in tongues they had never learned. On the 4th night, the pulse intensified. The forest trembled. Trees bent as if pushed by a windless hurricane. Then, from the darkness, came the red light. Not a single lamp, but a glow that filled the mountain like molten metal. The soldiers froze. From the tunnel mouth ahead, the first car emerged, or at least its outline. The train was intact, yet different. Blackened metal twisted into angles that defied engineering. Copper filaments woven across its hull like veins. It did not run on rails. The rails seemed to vanish beneath it, as though the train's weight or energy displaced reality itself. Volkov ordered his men to hold position. Through the cab windows, they saw movement. Shadows shifted behind the glass, something living, something aware. Then came the sound, the low, mechanical voice of the machine itself vibrating through the air. Awakening complete. For hours, the team observed without moving. The train's headlights scanned the forest, not for direction, but for presence, for acknowledgement. One of the younger soldiers whispered that he saw faces pressed against the glass in every car, pale and twisted, eyes glowing red. Another claimed he heard whispers calling his name from inside the metal. By dawn, the pulse had subsided. The train, as if obeying some hidden command, slipped back into the tunnel, leaving no trace on the rails, no footprints in the snow. Volkov's men were shaken to their cores. When they returned to base, their reports were classified as unverifiable anomalies, buried in the depths of ministry archives. Meanwhile, Carver monitored the same frequencies from Frankfurt. Every month, precisely at midnight, the same pattern returned. 3 short pulses, a pause, 3 long. Analysts speculated it was a ghost signal, a leftover of wartime experimentation. Some suggested an unknown weapon or a natural phenomenon. Carver, however, knew it was neither. The pulses were deliberate. They were alive. Over the next decade, sightings persisted. In the dense forests of the Czech Sudetes, a small group of hikers reported a train passing overhead, casting red light across their tents. In southern Poland, a logging crew claimed their axes bent against invisible rails. Each report, though dismissed publicly, was logged secretly by both NATO and the KGB. By the late 1970s, the Silent Line had developed a mythos of its own. Intelligence officers from both sides quietly speculated. Was it a weapon? A train powered by something beyond understanding? Or was it something else entirely? An experiment that had outlived its creators, moving through forests, mountains, and decades, invisible to conventional eyes, yet fully aware of anyone who approached? The strange energy emanating from the train affected not only people, but equipment. Geiger counters fluctuated wildly near the known tunnel zones. Compasses spun uncontrollably. Radios broadcast garbled whispers that resembled human language, but none could be deciphered. The Soviets attempted excavation in 1973, but heavy machinery failed mysteriously, engines smoking and sparking, as if the train itself rejected interference. At night, Carver sometimes thought he could hear it through his headphones, the faint pulse beneath the static, a heartbeat beneath the earth. He wrote in his personal notes, "I do not believe it is German anymore. It is not anything man-made. It moves of its own accord, and when it moves, the world feels it." The silent line persisted into the 1980s. Both sides continued surveillance, recording every anomaly, yet the train never appeared where anyone could touch it. Its movements remained random, yet purposeful. Analysts speculated it followed its own timeline, as if riding a path invisible to maps or satellites. And then, one winter night in 1984, in a forest near the old Owl Mountain tunnels, the pulse ceased entirely. For the first time in 40 years, the silent line was gone. Almost. Because decades later, those same signals would resurface, faint, irregular, untraceable, appearing on the instruments of the unwary. Those who stumbled across them reported feelings of vertigo, whispers in dead languages, and visions of red light slicing through forests where no forest existed. The silent line had vanished, and yet, somehow, it had left a door ajar. A door that, if opened, might finally reveal the true purpose of the ghost train and the experiments that made it live.